All right, welcome to episode 3 of the Space Prize Speaker Series. We are here with some wonderful women from the Astronomical Society of the Pacific, who we will introduce properly in a few moments. I've got a few opening slides before we get to our questions for them, and then we hope to have some questions from the live audience as well. So, kicking this off, I'm Mark Wagner. I'm the president at Space Prize Foundation, and I'll tell you a little bit about what we do before handing it off to my co-host, Leslie Anderson, who will handle most of the interview. So thanks for being here again, Leslie. To start with, I want to share a little bit about the Space Prize Challenge in New York City that we have been conducting for just about 6 months now. In January, we hosted a essay contest in 5 New York public high schools, 1 in each borough. In January, the finalists from that contest were invited to join a video contest. The final judging happened in March, and by the end of March, we were thrilled to bring 25 of the finalists to a simulated mission to Mars at the Challenger Center in Manhattan. We also celebrated the finalists at our own Yuri's Day celebration in April. All of the finalists actually also got their faces on massive billboards in Times Square, if you can imagine that. And that was a really fantastic partnership with the Feminine Quotient. We were able to send 4 of the winners to NASA's new leadership camp at Space Camp Lift in early April as well. And 5 of the winners are going to be taking a zero-G flight here at the end of May. There was some, surprisingly, the age restrictions were on the Space Camp program. So not all of our final winners at the zero-G flight could go to Space Camp. So we had some alternates involved there. But they'll be taking a parabolic flight and experiencing weightlessness and moon gravity and Mars gravity on Saturday, May 28th. So we're really excited about that coming up pretty quick. To learn more about what else Space Prize has cooking up, just visit spaceprize.org. Among other things there, you can find some aggregated news about women in space across the space industry. You can find anywhere Space Prize is in the press. And there's a couple other resources I want to point you toward there. This is not released just yet, but I wanted to tease it. Dr. Leslie Anderson is working with us on this project as well. But Space Prize is putting together essentially a 12-week intensive space education curriculum that will be released for free to the students and teachers of the world starting in June. So you can see the chapter list here. They're broken down into sub-lessons in each chapter, and it's pretty ambitious, going not only into basic space science and history of space exploration, but also into the new space economy and more space philosophy issues like sustainability and governance and ethics and so forth. There's also this speaker series, which is free and open to students, educators, and enthusiasts around the world. This is happening unless otherwise indicated. It happens on Wednesdays at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern, and you can calculate whatever time zone you happen to be in. But we're really thrilled about the astronauts, engineers, scientists, entrepreneurs, designers, lawyers, historians, you name it. In fact, we just lined up some fashion designers. We have a spacecraft interior designer. We have some really fantastic guests coming up, mostly women from across the industry in support of the young women that we're serving, but also some men in some spectacular roles. So really, really special series. Hope you guys, if you're just catching this one on YouTube, will come back and register for the whole series. Now, for the folks who are here today, a few participation norms. Again, it's a small group, so we don't have to worry too much about it, but please participate in the chat. I can see some chats going by already. I gotta get that open. And use the raise hand finger feature, or else literally raise your hand if you want to speak, or in most cases, you can probably just interrupt because it's a really small group. And then, of course, if we invite you to, feel free to unmute or share your screen so you can participate. And then if you use the help feature, that'll shoot me a message, or you can just shoot me a message in the chat, and I will try to help you out. Any questions or anything about that? Oh, cool. I see Helen is here. Leslie's responding. I think we're good. All right. I want to hand it over to Leslie Anderson, our host. Leslie has been a science teacher at High Tech High. She's been a coach. She's a curriculum developer, as I mentioned, working with us on that as well. She's been on a number of science adventures, if I can call them that. She's tracked great white sharks around South Africa and sea turtles to study their genetics, and she's been to the South Pole with the polar tracks. So that sounds fantastic. Every time I introduce her, I realize we need to do a turn the tables for one episode too. And she is now a Albert Einstein Distinguished Educator Fellow in Washington, D.C., placed at the Library of Congress. So Leslie, take it away. We're stoked to have you here.
Thank you so much, Mark. I have the distinct pleasure and privilege of getting to introduce our three panelists for today. We do have Vivian on, perfect. So I'm going to go through and introduce all three of them, but if you guys don't mind introducing yourselves in the chat so we get a chance to know where you're from and where you're calling in from. But I'm going to start off with Linda Shore. Linda's been passionate about improving public understanding of science, and most especially astronomy. She's very proud and honored to serve as the Chief Executive Officer of the Astronomical Society of the Pacific. She is a native San Franciscan who has spent most of her life in the Bay Area. She holds a master's degree in physics and astronomy from San Francisco State University and an EDD in science education from Boston University. Before coming to the ASP, Linda was a staff scientist and director of the Teacher Institute at the Exploratorium, San Francisco's renowned science museum. During her 21-year tenure at the Exploratorium, Linda led the development and implementation of an internationally acclaimed science teacher professional development program, including an innovative beginning science teacher program and a teacher leadership program. She has co-authored several science activity books for children and written numerous popular science articles. Linda has also conducted research on student astronomy learning, science teacher induction and retention, and gender equity in science. Her other passions include writing science fiction short stories, knitting, and spending time with her husband and 2 rescue greyhounds. So I'm going to first pause for a second and allow Linda to share, what are you doing now? Tell us a little bit about what exactly it is that your role is at ASP, and then we'll go on to our other 2 presenters.
Yeah, so I'm the CEO of the Astronomical Society of the Pacific. And basically what that means is doing everything I can in service to the organization to make sure that people on the staff have everything they need to do their work well, that the organization has really strong, a strong mission and vision and core values, and that everything we do meets those. Basically, the Astronomical Society of the Pacific is 134 years old. It's one of the oldest science societies in the world, actually. And our focus is on improving, is making sure that everybody enjoys looking up at the stars, everybody understands the universe above them, and is passionate about sharing their knowledge with other people. So that's basically what we're charged to do.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Linda. And I'm going to move on to introducing Theresa, and I'll allow her to share a little bit more about herself after I read her summary. So Theresa Summer loves being an astronomy educator for the ASP. She has worked in science education since 1998, mainly creating programs in planetariums and museums, but also in high school classrooms, teacher trainings, and tutoring. Theresa has 2 bachelor's degrees, one in astronomy and physics from San Francisco State University, and one in theater, education, and empowerment from Eugene Lang College, the new school for social research. Her astronomical journey led from being the department tutor at City College of San Francisco to interning at NASA Ames Research Center. Theresa rose from ushering to lecturing at California Academy of Sciences Morrison Planetarium before directing the programming at the planetarium at Orange Coast College. She had important time at Lawrence Hall of Science and San Francisco State University before returning to the revamped Morrison Planetarium, where she was involved with opening the new museum and leading the planetarium presenter team. Theresa then taught astronomy, physics, calculus, and algebra for English language learners in an international high school for 3 years before heading to the Astronomical Society of the Pacific. Here at ASP, she works on citizen science projects, CosmoQuest, Girl Scouts with the SETI Institute's Reaching for the Stars, NASA Science for Girl Scouts, amateur astronomers through the Night Sky Network, and the Mega Movie, and now with very young children through My Sky Tonight. Her secret mission in life is to help people to understand that science is not just for crazed geniuses in lab coats, but is for everyone and is an important part of being an active citizen in today's world. Theresa, go ahead and tell us what you're working on right now at ASP.
Thanks so much, Leslie. I had even forgotten some of those things that I've done. It's been a long journey. I've been with the ASP for 6 years and done a lot of really great projects. Right now, there's, I'm not sure if you know about the National Science Foundation STEM for All video showcase, but we have a video up there. And so that's what I've been working on a lot today, is responding to all of the questions coming in. We also have a project called Eclipse Ambassadors that Vivian might speak about, but we're working on that, which is the 2 upcoming solar eclipses in 2023 and 2024, not the lunar eclipse that's coming up on Sunday. So we are training amateur astronomers and undergraduates to connect with each other on teams, and we're going to give them lots of tools for sharing the eclipse with their community. And also working a lot with training folks at ASP. We work with amateur astronomers, we work with teachers, we work with park rangers, lots of formal and informal educators and professional scientists. So we've done, we're looking forward to doing those trainings. So we're working on that. So many things. I just want to say that I'm happy to be here. I've worked a lot in cases of gender equity and having more girls specifically getting involved with astronomy. It's really a passion of mine to help people get on the astronomy bus. And so I'm really happy to be here with you guys today.
Thank you so much, Theresa and Linda. So we've heard a little bit about you, but we're curious to know, can you give us a history and tell us a little bit about the Astronomical Society of the Pacific?
Sure, I can do that. So the Astronomical Society of the Pacific began in 1889 in San Francisco. What had happened was on January 1st, 1889, there was a total eclipse of the sun that passed over Northern California. And at that time, even an eclipse that was just about 80 or 90 miles away from the city, it was difficult to get there. There was no bridge to get there. You had to take a ferry across the bay, and then you had to get some kind of transportation, probably involving a horse that would carry your telescope and everything, all your camping gear. And so nowadays you can just drive. You could have, but not then. And what the society decided is, there wasn't even a society yet. A group of amateur astronomers decided to team up with amateur photographers. And photography was a brand new thing, because in the past, astronomers would try to sketch very quickly what the solar eclipse looks like. And you can imagine how difficult that is, because you're in the dark during a total eclipse. And it's very difficult to capture the eclipse in the few moments that you have. But with this new science of photography, you could attach it to a telescope and actually take an image. And that's what happened. And they decided to meet a month later, the whole group, on February 7th in San Francisco at the headquarters of the amateur astronomy group, photography group. And they enjoyed this meeting so much that they decided to form the society that night with its mission, which was unique for a science society, that it would be for anybody who was passionate about astronomy, be it professionals or amateurs or enthusiasts, and that they would meet to promote looking up and promote the science of astronomy. And that's been in our DNA ever since.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. And Theresa and Linda, if you guys both want to answer questions, you're welcome to. If we want to pass it off to one or the other, you guys jump in and just tell us. But I'm also curious to know, it's amazing to see 2 women here presenting on this panel. What has been the history of women's involvement in the Astronomical Society of the Pacific?
Should I say that? I guess
Gotta let you take that one, Linda.
Yeah. So I'm actually the first CEO in its history who is a woman. There have been plenty of white guys And so that was really a novel thing. And for those of you who are thinking of astronomy as a career, I was a student at a local university, San Francisco State, as we all were apparently. Apparently they produced a whole lot of wonderful astronomers. And I would go to the Astronomical Society of the Pacific to help me teach better, because I was teaching astronomy at the university. And were it not for the ASP, I would not have become a successful instructor. I would not have gone on to get a doctorate in education in Boston. I would not have gone on to the Exploratorium, and I wouldn't have gone on to become the CEO of the institution that started me off in the first place. So it's always been a very welcoming place for women. And that's what I think is part of why you see so many women today at the ASP. It's always been supportive. I think we're well over 50% women at the ASP, probably 60% or something like that.
I do want to say it's a very welcoming place. We get to bring our full selves to work and really share our enthusiasm. And Linda has created a great environment that's very welcoming for people. And I have been lucky enough to work under her for my entire tenure at the ASP. Some folks have been there for 20 plus years, and but I've under the wire got in, and it's a great place to work. And
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. So why is it important for young people to have the opportunity to look through a telescope?
You go, Teresa.
I love that question, Leslie. I think there's so many answers to it, but for me, when I look up at the night sky, it really is just a moment of awe that you feel when you look at a star cluster or a distant galaxy, or for me, the Hubble Deep Field is just amazing. Of course, that's not looking through a telescope, but I think it's important because we can get so centered on our own problems that we forget this big picture that exists. And I feel like looking through a telescope can give you that big picture back and kind of give you a sense of inspiration for keeping going when you have a tough time going on.
And I've enjoyed helping people see the universe for the first time through a telescope. That gives me actually more joy than when I look myself. I've taken telescopes out and shown little kids the planets. We know when you see Saturn's rings for the first time and you realize they're real, you know, that you're even if they're tiny itty bitty images inside the binoculars or the telescope, it's shocking, you know. I went to Yosemite once just on vacation and decided to set up a telescope in the middle of the place I was staying, and people wanted to know what was going on. I said, take a look at Jupiter. And they'd see the little moons of Jupiter and they couldn't believe it. It was just, I had fun just having people be awe-inspired and look up.
And I want to add, Linda, you reminded me of when I first looked through a telescope at Saturn myself. I thought that it was a sticker. It was a sidewalk astronomy event. And John Dobson, if you know him, was the person running the telescope. And he's like, no, that's really Saturn. And I had him move it and then go back to it so that I could believe him that that was what it was, because it was so amazing. And I also remember very well the first time I found Jupiter. And I think that that's something that's really important for girls, is to steer the telescope to find things, to get that hands-on experience of exploring the universe. And so sharing it, finding things in the sky and looking, it's all kind of part and parcel for me.
Yeah, I was going to ask you both, is there like a very memorable interaction you had with a student or a young person for the first time when they looked through a telescope, what their reaction was to seeing the night sky?
Yeah, I have two. One of them is silly. I was a graduate student at Boston University, and all graduate students had to pick a night and run the telescopes for the undergraduates at the university who were required to go look through a telescope, and they all waited until a week before the finals, and that's just the way it was. It was this long line of students waiting to look through the telescope, and it took me a while this was a large telescope, and it took me a while to align the thing to see, and I think it may have been Saturn or Jupiter. It was one of the planets, Mars maybe, and it was in Boston in the winter, freezing. I could hardly move my fingers. I felt really pressured to line this damn thing up. And finally and I said, okay, come on. And the first fellow who took a look at the telescope took the whole thing and went, and turned it and went, I don't see anything. And I remember thinking that there was a lot more learning that had to be done about telescopes. And then the other one, which is completely the other direction, is I go to India every other year to work with Tibetan monks who are learning astronomy as part of the Dalai Lama's initiative to bring modern science to Buddhism and bring Buddhism to Western science. And the first time I set a telescope up to have the monks and nuns look up at these objects, they were astonished, and it was so transformative for them and for me to watch them merge these worldviews, which is what I was doing too. Those are the two most memorable to me. One for ridiculous reasons, and the other one for more profound reasons.
I can share one of many, but I would love to share my screen for just a second and show you a picture to help you illustrate this story.
Give me just a second.
So
There you go.
as I was mentioning, I have done training amateur astronomers. And so we were basically helping them be more welcoming to girls. And right after we had done a training session, we had a star party. And so this is actually not a girl looking through the telescope, but falling on the telescope. And the astronomer is in blue behind her and said, okay, you moved the telescope. So that means you have to help me find the moon again, because they were looking at the moon. And so she showed her how to look through the telescope, and she found the moon. And this girl is about 8.5 at the time. And she fell into the telescope, but shared all of the joy of doing astronomy with every girl and every parent and guardian that was there, because she was like, I found the moon, come and look at it, everybody come take a look at the moon. And so that opportunity that she had could have been something that people were like, oh no, you ruined it. I have other friends, sadly, that have had that experience, but she was so filled with joy. And I think everybody that night just was inspired by her.
Thank you guys so much for sharing that. And I'm loving reading all of the stories from other folks that are sharing in the chat. So thank you. Continue to share those. Those are awesome. I'm wondering too, we have students from and teachers and educators from around the globe. Where would someone go if they wanted to look through a telescope? Are there astronomical societies around the globe, and how would you find those and get connected in your own community?
Go ahead, Teresa.
That's a great question. And there's a really easy answer for folks in the US, because we can go to the Night Sky Network. If you go there, there's a little widget where you can just put in your zip code, and it'll tell you all of the astronomy clubs within 50 miles, 100 miles. And so there's a lot of really great ways you could connect with astronomers there. Outside of the US, I would encourage people to connect with the Astronomers Without Borders. They are an international organization that we work with, and they connect a lot of folks to other folks, especially with girls though. There's a lot of great Girl Scout equivalent programs that are around the world. And so there's an organization of girl guides that usually have connections with telescopes and such. Linda, did I forget anything?
No, not really. I would put, Oh, yes, Astronomers Without Borders. Thank you for putting that link there. That's a great place to look. And the Night Sky Network links are down in the chat. Definitely take a look at those. And by the way, you can contact your local planetariums or science museums and ask them. Oftentimes, an astronomical society will visit once a month or some period of time and set up events for the public. And oftentimes museums will have special observing when there's an event like a lunar eclipse or a solar eclipse. Something special will go on at those times. And your local university. I know I had to do public astronomy nights once a month, and I would set up the telescopes for the public, who were much more polite when working with the telescopes than some of my students.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much. I'm going to switch gears a little bit. Who or what inspired you to be interested in space? And part two to the question, what advice do you have for young people who want to enter the space economy?
So I'll answer it first. I'm older than everybody else on the call. So, when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s, a lot of women didn't go into science at all, let alone astronomy or the physical sciences. And it didn't occur to me that that was a possibility until I got into college and started taking introductory astronomy classes. I'd always been interested in astronomy through science fiction. I was a pretty avid reader. I would read Ursula Le Guin. I would read Ray Bradbury, the classics. And I didn't think I could get anywhere beyond that. And when I got into college, I started getting interested in astronomy and began to take more courses, and slowly but surely over time got into it that way. And I think the deal was sealed. It was another eclipse. It was a partial eclipse of the sun that was crossing over San Francisco State. And I was still on the fence about what to do with my life. And I thought, oh, there's an eclipse. It'll be really cool if I take out some equipment to the quad and just, show people how to view the eclipse safely. I mean, I just did this off the top of my head. And I had so much fun doing it. I went, this is a lot more fun than in the major I currently have. So I think I'll switch. And so that's how I sort of got into it.
That's great, Linda. I never heard that story before. For me, when I was very small, probably 6 or 7, there was a blackout in New York City. I grew up in New York, and I was so amazed with the stars. And so I couldn't believe it. Like when it was in the middle of the summertime, and it was a really warm night, perfect for like laying out on the lawn and looking up at the stars. And I remember just feeling like there's got to be other planets and places, and maybe there's even people looking back at me. And I just was filled with that bigger picture idea that we were talking about. And I didn't get into astronomy at first, but I kind of took a circuitous route, which a lot of girls and women do, but I got here. And so I think that rediscovering that when I took a break from different occupations was really useful to remember what I loved as a kid. And now I get to share what I love with everyone. So it really
never occurred to me that the blackout in New York would make it possible to see the stars. I mean, of course it did. That's amazing.
Yeah, I was trying to remember. I didn't remember actually until some of older astronomers mentioned it. And I was like, yeah, that might have been why that night was so clear.
Oh, Liam, that's very funny. He says that during the Northridge earthquake in 89, I think. No, the Northridge, that was our quake. Anyway, one of the California quakes, all the lights went out in LA. And he's saying people were calling Griffith Observatory to ask about, what is that white streak in the sky? They'd never seen the Milky Way before. That's so funny. And the advice that I would give to the girls on the call, I would say, if you're passionate about anything, go for it. Don't let people tell you that this career isn't for you, or you shouldn't feel like, well, yeah, I really want to be a astronaut, or I really want to be a astronomy teacher, but that's not what I feel like my parents want me to do, or that's not what I feel like I'm going to be successful at. If you are passionate about it, you're going to be successful at it for sure. So go with your passion is what I'd recommend.
I agree 100%. And I would like to say also that I've heard a lot of women in astronomy and students say that they're not good in math, or someone told them that they shouldn't do astronomy or physics. And for me, those, first of all, don't let anyone tell you no. But secondly, everyone has a hard time with math at some point. It might be calculus, it might be multiplication, it might be logarithmic differentials. There's some place where math is going to get challenging. So I want to encourage people to not let a bad teacher or two impact your life. Do what you love. The other thing I want to mention is having a network of like-minded people is a really good thing that will help you whenever you feel down, or if you feel like I can't do this, having somebody else show you through the steps or talk about victories that they had will really make a big difference. So connect with people that are in your group or in your school, and it'll go far.
Thank you both for that great advice and for the amazing stories to connect with us. Linda, you mentioned science fiction, and Theresa, you mentioned having people on other planets looking towards us. We're rapidly moving towards a multi-planet future. And I'm curious to know, what are your hopes? Like in 100 years from now, what do you hope that that's going to look like?
Yeah, so two things. I mean, we're already up to knowing about, what are we up now to, 5,000 something? I haven't checked my iPhone in a while. 5,000 something exoplanets, something of that order. I used to get a ping on my cell phone when a new exoplanet was discovered, but it was pinging so often I turned the thing off. And so I hope that humanity understands that the Earth is not, our solar system isn't alone. And that's a big leap of understanding, that the planets we're all familiar with and we memorize in school are far, 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 far from the only ones. And the telescopes that we've sent into space, the James Webb, is going to start pinpointing the ones that are really like the Earth. It has the ability to look for atmospheres, and to look for atmospheres that look like ours. Doesn't mean life can't exist in another kind of atmosphere, but we know it happened here, so it's a good first step to be looking. And I'm just hoping that raises the consciousness of all of us that life, when we do find it, and I think we will, is precious. Sure, it might exist in many different places out in the universe, but it is not an easy thing to maintain, to get going and maintain. So there's that. And then the second piece is, if we ever make contact with another civilization, what is that going to be like? And I mentioned the monks before. They gave me a perspective that shocked me because I hadn't considered it. When we talk about aliens, we in the West tend to ask ourselves, okay, so are we prepared? Do we have our weapons ready? I'm sure they're coming to take us over. Why else would they come? We have this very combative way of looking at this. And the first question the Buddhist monks asked me was, well, if they've traveled all this way, they must be here because they need our help. What are we going to do to help them? And I'd never heard that question before. So what I'm hoping is we break out of the way we tend to look at newcomers, and we look at newcomers in a new way. that's what I'm sort of hoping. And that was a huge transformational thing for me when they said that. So.
So I love that idea of a multi-planet future. One of the things, though, that it reminds me of is that whole Mars terraforming. And I think that that is something that's going to be happening in the next 100 years. However, Mars will never be Earth. When you look at a place like Yosemite or like the ice caps or the oceans, like there's different planets are different planets, and we've grown up on this Earth. And so as we were coming into being the species we are, all of those interdependent systems made us perfect to live on Earth. And so I really hope that in the next 100 years, we're spending a lot of time taking care of our home, in addition to exploring other places, because it's wonderful to learn about Mars and Europa and whatever other targets we're thinking about, but no place like home.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Teresa, for sharing that. And Linda, thank you so much. I really do appreciate that perspective from the monks. And I know moving away from, we talk about colonizing other planets. I just wanted to know if either of you wants to share a little bit about, why is that such a trigger word, and maybe what should we be talking about instead as we're talking about moving into other parts of the universe?
Oh, I'm glad you asked that. Yeah. The word colonization implies a lot of really negative things, right? It implies a group of people landing somewhere and deciding that their way is the right way and the only way. And they bring all of their baggage and they bring all of their bad habits and so forth to a new place. Now, when we quote colonize the moon or colonize Mars, there's very, very, very likely nobody there. We know pretty much that there's nobody there that we're going to, whose land we're going to take. But we have a lot of bad habits here on Earth. We have not taken care of the Earth particularly well. So if we take our habits to new planets and moons, we're not going to take care of those planets either. So we have to, in my mind, get our ducks in order and learn how to take care of this planet and learn all the best practices of planetary stewardship before we move out and make the same mistakes on some other worlds.
Can't really add too much to that. I think it's really, we need to focus on relationships on Earth and relationship, as Linda said, with best practices. So hopefully we can do that and make ourselves better as a species before we go to other places.
That's great advice. Thank you. So I'm wondering if one or both of you can share a little bit about the overview effect. And then I want you to answer, how does astronomy help bring the overview effect down to Earth?
Teresa, you want to try that one first?
Yeah, well, we won't all be astronauts. Some of us will be, some of us won't be. But we can all have that effect. The overall effect is like when, I'm not sure if everybody on the call knows that term, but it's when the astronauts saw this picture right here, the Earth from space, and we're just awestruck by the beauty and fragility and the way that we're all one planet, and kind of forgot about the borders and skirmishes and wars, and that's going on a lot right now in our world. And so having that effect would be nice for folks that aren't astronauts. And that's why I think astronomy is great. Planetariums, telescopes, books, YouTube, wherever you can find the connection to space, it really helps hone this idea that we're all in this together. Linda?
Yeah, I have never had the privilege of, being up in orbit and looking down at the fragile planet. speaking of science fiction, most recently, William Shatner became famous, the original Captain Kirk. This is well before all of your times. At the age of, how old was he, 90? Something like that. Went up into space and came down completely, obviously transformed. And if you haven't seen the video, you really should. It's on YouTube. Just type William Shatner returns from space or something. And he was in tears, and he clearly experienced how fragile the planet was. He saw this thin atmosphere, this paper thin atmosphere, all this blue that we live in, and then blackness, where life does not exist. And it moved him to want to take care of the planet. And I don't know how to have that without going. However, just listening to someone like him describe what he saw and get emotional and cry, that hit me harder than seeing a photograph of Earth, because you see these photographs like over Teresa's head, they're stunning, but it's not giving, it's flat, or the images that, is it Liam is showing of the International Space Station? These are awe-inspiring. It's not the same as being there and realizing that when you're in space, you're in an area where nothing is alive, and Earth is really fragile.
I just wanted to share, I saw William Shatner perform with the National Symphony Orchestra at the Kennedy Center 2 weeks ago, and it was so powerful, exactly what you're saying. And he was basically narrating his experience and looking at the Earth, and he really is a transformed person, but even just listening to the way he was speaking over the music was really powerful for me. That actually ties nicely into our next question that we have for you. We have some folks who are interested in space and art, and I'm wondering if either one of you wants to talk a little bit about the connection and the overlap between space and art.
Teresa?
I have another picture I could show you if I could find it. When my first car, I painted galaxies and nebulas on it. So yeah, maybe I'll show folks that. But I think art is just such an entry point. There's so many ways to get into space, and art is an amazing one. There's Vivian, I know you're just here to listen, but if you can talk about your friend, I believe her name is Sylvia, who does art in Chile, and she does like a space art program to educate folks, and works with students doing space art. I'll try and find her name. But go ahead, Linda, do you have more?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. The other way that I got into astronomy as a kid was looking at these images, these futuristic images of maybe Mars looks like this and maybe Saturn looks like this. We didn't know what these things looked like when I was a kid. I mean, we saw them in telescopes, but we had no clue. And I loved those things because they were based on science, but they presented what the universe might look like in a way that was stunningly beautiful. And I don't know, so that was really important to me growing up. I even tried my hand at painting myself, and I still have these horrible paintings in my office that I did when I was 16. They're really funny, but I've carried them around with me actually my whole life because they remind me that, of a time when I was a kid where I just, was so awe-inspired that I felt the need to try and paint what I was learning. So have you seen the moon? So have you seen the Moon Symphony? No, I have not. Yeah, and we shouldn't forget other art ways of doing art. There's music, there's poetry, there's science fiction, there are lots of ways to portray the future in space and to portray planets and things.
I don't think it's giving away too much if I mention that Linda and I both have partners that are artists, full-time artists. So
That's how we got the art in.
yeah, so we immediately both thought of visual arts, but there are so many other ones, like music is an incredible connector. There's so many ways to get to astronomy. So just looking up is one.
Oh, the other thing, it's just occurred to me that Teresa and I also, with the entire ASP, we went to a local museum to look at an exhibit on Afrofuturism. And what Afrofuturism is using the arts essentially to portray a future that's positive for African Americans in the African diaspora. So if you think of things like the Pink Panther, oh my God, Black Panther, or see the other things I know of are predate all of you.
Well, the Octavia Butler stories.
Yes, of course, Octavia Butler stories, or science fiction stories. And anyway, there's a whole movement of that which uses art to look at the future through a different lens. Pink Panther.
I'm loving all of the chat that we have going on about different resources. And I love how many of you are interested in art and the STEAM part of STEM. And we will have lots of speakers in the future that will be featuring specifically art related to space. But I'm wondering if you guys can talk a little bit about your own experience with helping to support non-science background astronomy. Have you trained any teachers who are not science backgrounded, and what does that look like? What additional support or resources do you need in order to support them?
Oh yeah, I did that for about 21 years at the Exploratorium. I ran the teacher education programs there. And a lot of teachers have very strong science backgrounds. They tend to teach high school, but elementary and middle school teachers are not trained in science typically. They are required maybe to take a couple of courses, but teaching astronomy is very foreign to them. So the best way to teach somebody how to teach, say, astronomy, if they haven't had a lot of content background, it's actually not that difficult. What you want to do is teach them astronomy using the techniques you want them to use. I find it way easier to have those teachers teach better because they don't have a lot of, they haven't been lectured at about astronomy. So what tends to happen often with teachers is they teach the way they're taught. And if they're lectured at, they lecture. And that's not the best way to teach anybody anything. So I will take a group of teachers and I'll say, okay, today we're going to study the planets in the solar system. And today we're going to learn about how big they are and how far away they are. So let's make models together. Let's experiment with size and distance and let's lay it out, blah, blah, blah. When they then learn it, they've also learned a good way to teach it. And then they reproduce that with their students. And so that's what I find is the most effective. And when I try to do it with people who already know the subject and lecture it, they're less likely to want to change how they do things because, they think it works for them, but it doesn't.
Linda's the best at that. I think teaching teachers is really great because they all love to learn. I think all of us love to learn initially, but then getting back to that can be challenging. And so just reminding folks about it is really useful. And
oh, Narol, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. You're a non-science background teacher and you hope there'll be more online astronomy workshops for international teachers. I'm so glad you asked. If you go, I'm going to type the Astronomical Society Pacific's website in the chat and keep an eye on that because we're going to begin to offer online workshops for teachers, K-12 teachers, college teachers, museum educators, all kinds of teachers. And we're going to do exactly that. We're doing it on Zoom, and we've been doing that for a long time, actually. And we're going to open it up to international teachers. The only thing, I'm so glad you're excited, except you're going to have to get up at 3 a.m. I don't know where you're located. Are you located in the States, or are you located in a time zone where you're going to have to drink some coffee?
I don't mind. Also we have it, some of it at the same time where, there'll be a 1 hour a week that's live and in person, and the rest will be asynchronous. So we know that time zones are an issue.
Yeah, we try to have some self-paced stuff as well, and videos, a lot of videos you can look at so that you can look at things later. So a potpourri of things are going to exist on the website.
So I just have one more question for the two of you. Unless there are other questions from the audience, feel free to chat those in. But my final question for you is, why is education so important for the field of astronomy?
You want to go, Theresa?
Sure. I think that's a great question. And I think of it not only for astronomy, but all of science. Really, we are in a time where thinking critically is a really super useful skill to have. There's lots of people who are trying to sell us bridges as a, I don't know if anyone knows that example where it's like, yeah, I have a Brooklyn Bridge I want to sell you. But there's lots of people who are trying to give us information that just isn't true. Even, I'm not going to name them. I'm not going to give them that leg up. But I think being able to learn and understand and question is very much a part of doing astronomy. So it's kind of astronomy and education together can hopefully make folks more science literate, more able to participate in the world, and less likely to take any wooden nickels.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Theresa's saying about the importance of using science to teach people to think. I also feel like astronomy is a good gateway to learning science. It's not so threatening. People love it. Astronomy and dinosaurs are sort of the two things that kids kind of like to learn first. And that's because it's awe-inspiring, right? There's nothing more awe-inspiring than an animal that's as tall as like a 6-story building, right? And astronomy is the same way. So I think using astronomy to increase public science literacy is really, really useful.
And even though we're not there yet, like we are trying to be more inclusive as a field, as anyone can do astronomy. You don't have to have a PhD. You can, but you can do stuff with the general public. You can do amateur stuff. You can do citizen science things. There's so many ways that you can do astronomy and space science with right now, even.
A couple follow-ups to that. We have Jackie from Australia wanting to know if there are resources for the Southern Hemisphere, because we know that looks a little different than the Northern Hemisphere. And also, is there an opportunity to partner or work together in teacher education?
Yeah, so Vivian in the chat has mentioned that a lot of the Astronomical Society of the Pacific's resources are both Northern and Southern Hemisphere friendly. There's a program we're working now out of Chile, and it's called Big Astronomy. It's looking at how big data sets from the major telescopes in the world are being used, and the ones in Chile are on the ALMA telescopes are an example of that. Also, I'll pitch our book. I don't know, this is gonna be upside down and backwards, I think. Is it? I gotta turn off my, I will put it in the chat. So is this backwards?
No, it's right side up.
It's just backwards for me.
Yeah.
So this was a book that I co-authored with Vivian White, who's on the call, and David Prosper. And it's a basic sky watcher's guide And it's done in sort of a very user-friendly way, which you're not going to be able to see, right? There you go. But it does Northern and Southern Hemisphere equally, so that nobody has an advantage here. And I can write it in the chat. I'll do that right.
Perfect. Well, I want to thank both of you so much for taking time tonight to share a little bit about your story and to talk to us about the Astronomical Society of the Pacific. I am going to turn it over to Mark to kind of close us out and give us a little sneak preview as to next week's webinar.
I love that Leslie says tonight, but it's, it's afternoon for those of us in California, and we've got people from Australia and Malaysia and Brazil. So we're all over the map.
East Coast time zone over here.
Yeah, it's great. Thank you, Linda and Theresa, for being with us today, and Vivian for being here too. Just really fantastic to be able to hear your stories and tap into your brains for an hour. Just great experience. So glad we captured it on video, and I'm really looking forward to being able to share it with
pleasure.
More students and educators everywhere. And thanks, Leslie, as always, for a well-conducted interview. It's great working with you. I do want to tease for next week. Our speaker is actually going to be Liam Kennedy, who is what's the opposite of vaporized? Is materialized in front of his ISS live feed. So Liam is the inventor of the ISS Above, a little device you can get for your schools to display the live feed from the ISS and information, telemetry, etc. from the ISS. And he is a great educator about all things space himself. So we're excited to have Liam on the show next week. At the same time, whether it's evening or morning or in the middle of the night to you, we'll be back next week with Liam, and I'm looking forward to it. So thank you, Linda. Thank you, Theresa. Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Vivian. And thank you to everybody who was here and participating and participating in the chat and sharing questions and all that. So
It was
fantastic
Thank you,
episode.
everybody. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thanks
Thank
for all your
you.
great questions and attention. It was great.